So, when I was 33 years old, I discovered my calling. I want to talk about 3 decisions that shape us today. I want to talk about what to do, what truly matters, and who to marry. And the spelling in what truly matters is wrong, because spellings don't matter. I teach English, so. So when I was 33 years old, I discovered my calling. I realized that I wanted to teach. I wanted to go into education. I wanted to do this with my life. But I'm lying if I tell you that I discovered it at the age of 33. I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. I knew my father was a teacher. I watched him teach growing up. I loved it. When I was 18 years old, I finished school. Somebody asked me, what would you really like to do? I knew I wanted to teach, but I was too afraid to admit that. I think I was afraid because I thought it was not that great a thing to do with your life, that I wouldn't make any money, that I wouldn't really make a contribution to the world. So I didn't follow that. I decided to do what everybody else was doing. I did an MBA. I worked in branding. I became a branding manager. And I would say I was reasonably above average, which made it very hard for me to leave that. You know, it's very easy to leave something if you're bad. That's actually a gift. If you're really bad at everything except your calling, it's really easy to find your calling. The problem is when you're reasonably good at a lot of things, it becomes harder to leave. Eventually, I took that call. And when I did, at the age of 33, leave branding and got into education, I discovered what I'd been missing out on. You see, I spent my whole life thinking I was slightly above average. But when I followed my true passion, my calling, I realized I'm amazing. And I know I shouldn't say this myself. But I'll tell you a few stories and maybe you'll believe me. So when I came to my father's school about 5 years ago, I took over a class, an English class. It was the 9th class. And I started teaching them English. And I saw that a lot of kids could barely write a letter. They used to have letters dictated to them so that they can write it in the exam. And I thought that was really stupid. I mean, what was the point of English if you couldn't write? So I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get rid of the exam. And all year, we're just going to write and we're just going to read. Everybody was sure this would not work. I had a feeling it would. I had a feeling that if you replace fear with purpose, you can do great things. It worked for me. So I did that. The first year, I managed to get 2 full book reports out of my class. 2 full book reports, 40 pages. 2 kids managed to read a book and then write a book report on it. The second year, I got 2 actual books. 2 actual novels written by kids in 9th class. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I've always wanted to write a book, and I started pretty late. And it's amazing that these kids in class 9th, while they're in school, they've already written a book. All we did was give exams. Last year, 40 kids, there we go, 40 kids wrote books. 40. The entire class wrote a novel. As a matter of fact, we have this thing called November Novel Writing Month. It's very popular around the world. We participate in it. And all 40 kids in my 9th class wrote books last year. And this is something that we plan to continue. Every year, kids in our 9th class will write books. Now, it's not just writing that I worked on. I really wanted them to read. And there was a good reason for that. I thought reading changed my life. And I think it's a critical component of literacy. I don't think you've really done school if you don't know how to read well. So I tried to encourage that in my kids. When I arrived, I asked them, how many kids issue books from our school library? They told me, 0. So the first year I went around, talked to kids, I said, listen, you've got to read, issue books from the library. I managed to convince 10 kids. The second year, I upped that 5 times, up to 50 kids. Last year, we had 1,500 kids reading books from the school library. Look at that. That's a line of kids waiting to issue a book. I take their picture because I don't want to invest in a software. I just take their picture. I know who has which book. It's simple. So the point is that I always thought that I was reasonably above average, but it's only when I started to follow my calling that I realized I could make significant changes in the world. I can make a meaningful contribution. I started to change people's lives. And I think that's true for all of you. I think that all of you need to find that thing that you truly believe is your calling, because the world needs you to do that. It's one thing that we struggle a lot with, trying to figure out, well, what is my calling? A lot of you may be looking at yourselves and saying, I don't know what I'm really good at. I don't know what my calling is. And I have a theory about that. And that theory is that the reason you don't know right now is because you're looking at everything from a model of fear. All your life, you've been taught fear. Right from when you were in school, you've been taught to be afraid. And you look at everything through fear. It's only when you dial down the fear a little that the voice of your purpose will start to get heard. It's only when you stop being afraid that you can hear what your true calling is from inside you. I'll finish this off with a story. In one of my classes, there was a kid, and he could barely write a couple of lines. He was very, very weak in English, and to be honest with you, I thought, I don't think I'll be able to help him. So I went through his notebook, and I found out that he liked to draw. He was drawing some logos, WWE, and stuff like that. So I don't know anything about art. I looked at that, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is really nice. You should make more of these. And I forgot about it. A few weeks later, he came to me with a few more drawings. And he said, how are these? I said, oh, they're really nice. I don't even remember what they were. He's going to watch this video. So, I don't even remember what they were, but I think they were good, because I told him they're good. And I kept telling him they're good. He passed out a few years ago. Last year, he gave me this. This is a portrait of Steve Jobs made with electrical wires. This is not a drawing. He's used electrical wires, and it's pretty amazing, but this is not the most amazing thing. Along with this, he gave me a letter, a 2-page letter, where he wanted to tell me the difference I made in his life, how I changed his life. That's still not the best part. The best part is that letter was in English. He wrote me a beautiful 2-page letter in English to tell me what he felt. And I remember I had his portrait in front in his letter, and I was like, Waris, this is the work of art here. Who taught you to write? I didn't. And that's my point, that we worry too much about the fears and we forget about the purpose. If you focus on the purpose, the fears take care of themselves. If I'd focused on Waris' English and not on his purpose, I don't think I would have done either. I focused on his purpose, and the fears took care of themselves. John Gottman is a very, very famous psychologist, and he specializes in one particular area, couples. He's so good that he can look at a couple in the first 15 seconds and tell you whether they will stay together or not. Yeah. And how does he do that? He looks for a couple of classic signs, but the biggest one, the one he says is the most important sign, is contempt. What is contempt? Contempt is when you look down on another person, when you don't respect their opinion, when you don't take them seriously. Why does that happen? I think it happens because people don't respect each other's values. So how do they end up together if they don't respect each other's values? I'll have to tell you this through a story. When I was 21 years old, I met my wife. And nothing special happened. But the next time I met her, we spoke. And we had a 25-minute conversation. At the end of the 25-minute conversation, I knew this woman was perfect for me. I didn't know I was going to marry her, but I knew she was special, and I wanted to be around her. How did I know that? Well, 2 years before that, when I was 19 years old, I came across a book by Ayn Rand called The Fountainhead. It was an amazing book, but more importantly, it was the book that I needed. In that book, well, before I read that book, all I wanted to do was to be a person that does something for the world, that everybody likes, blah, blah, blah. But when I read that book, I realized that if you want to do anything for the world, first, you have to be someone yourself. And how can you be someone if you don't know who you are, what you stand for, what's important to you? I didn't have answers to any of those questions. So over the next 2 years, I found those answers. Who am I? What am I willing to die for? What do I want to live for? What is so important that my life is incomplete without it? When I found the answers to these questions, I knew what my values were. Values are what's most important to you. And once I knew my values, as soon as I met my wife, I knew this person matched up with my values perfectly. She was right for me. And that's the most important thing. We have a tendency to go around looking for the most perfect person. Why? I mean, imagine if I tried to marry Cristiano Ronaldo. I mean, he's amazing. He's really beautiful. But he's not right for me. First of all, I don't understand Portuguese. How will we talk to each other? My point is that we have this checklist that the person that I end up with should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Why? It has nothing to do with who you are. So if I could give you one actionable advice on how to find the right person, find yourself. Find out who you are. How are you going to find the right person for you if you have no clue who you are? Find out what your values are. Find out what you want to live for. What's important to you. What you're willing to die for. And then you'll have answers to who the person is that's right for you. Now, what truly matters? I told you guys that the reason I came back to India was my calling, which is true. But there was another part to that reason, and that was my father. My father was 75 years old when I came back to India, and I knew we didn't have much time. So it was very important to me that I was there at the end with him. It was just something that I knew I needed. Those last 2 years that I had with my father, they were beautiful. They were the best years of my life. I finally got to talk to the man that brought me up, but not as a child, as a man. We got a chance to discuss his life, his father's life, and I wrote all of that down. And even today, it provides insight and clarity to me. It was so important. I remember the night when he died. I was in the ICU with him. I was holding his hand. And once I said goodbye to him, I went downstairs in the hospital car park. I sat inside my car, and I must have cried for a long time, but all I remember is that I was thanking God. I kept thanking him that he gave me that opportunity. It was so important. I would have left 100 jobs for that, for just those 2 years. And I'm so lucky I got that chance. And it's the same when I was hanging out with my wife, when I was doing MBA. Everybody told me, listen, you're spending too much time with this girl. You've got to focus on your career. There are companies coming for placement. And it's true. I didn't get a placement. So I have to tell you that. I didn't get placed. But one company I remember I came very, very close to getting placed. And I really blamed myself after that, was Reliance Infocom. Now imagine if I'd done things differently. I'd gotten placed in Reliance Infocom. What is Reliance Infocom? You don't know because it doesn't exist anymore. I mean, how much time do you spend in your first job? 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? I've been with my wife for 20 years. She got me through the hardest times in our lives. She helped me make all the right decisions for us. She helped me come back and be with my father. She helps me run the school. She is so important. Imagine if I'd given up her for Reliance Infocom. It sounds ridiculous now, but at that time it was a big decision. And finally, I remember my favorite day, the best day of my life. I was sitting in a park with my son. Actually, this is the time when I was still in branding, and I was really stressed out at work, and it was a really difficult time for me. And I thought it would be a good time to take a holiday. Maybe not, but I thought it would be a good time to take a holiday. So I took a holiday. We went to Rome, and I was sitting in the park, and it was a good day. But then I got an email on my BlackBerry. I checked my email. It was full of, by the way, BlackBerry is an ancient device we used to use to send emails. Anybody know about that? It was a big thing at that time. So I checked the email. It was filled with threats and abuse and all kinds of stuff that you need to get this done now, now, now. And I started to get really stressed out. And I thought to myself, you know what? I mean, I looked at my son. The sun was shining on his face through trees. You know, Rome parks, they have these really beautiful trees. And the weather was great. I had the best Italian cup of coffee in my hand, the best. It was the best. I'm going to go back just for that. It was a great day. And I thought to myself, this is not real. And I didn't throw my BlackBerry. I kept it on the side. Belonged to the company. I'm still a responsible person. So I kept the BlackBerry, and I did not think about it again. And I spent that day with my son, with my wife, with that great cup of coffee. And I had the best day. And I still remember that day. Every time I get a cold or a flu, I think about that day and I feel better. Every time I'm low, you know, sometimes you get low when you're doing things which are really difficult. That day gets me through it. If I'd given up that day for an email, how idiotic would it have been? And that's really my point, that what truly matters to me are relationships. But maybe it's not just me. Maybe it's all of us. As a matter of fact, I believe there was a study, a Harvard study, a 75-year study on what makes for a fulfilling and happy life. And the conclusion was relationships. That's it. And the problem is we treat our relationships like they're disposable and our jobs like they're indisposable. It's the other way around. Your jobs, your careers are disposable, but your relationships are not. In the past 20 years, I've changed a lot of jobs. In the past 20 years, I've changed careers. I've changed countries, but my relationships are still the same. And the reason I'm reasonably happy and can do all of these things is because I gave time to those relationships. I knew they mattered. And I think the reason I knew they mattered was because when I was 19, I figured it out for myself. What matters? So if I could tell you one thing today from all of this, figure that out for yourself. What's important? What matters to you? And hopefully, you'll be able to make these decisions the right way. Thank you.